This is To Man Talks, and today we're talking about mentorship.
Khalil, this topic of mentorship is just such a powerful one. I remember a sad story. I had a brother who committed suicide, and early in his life, we were away on holiday, and I remember the one morning he got up early in the morning, at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he wanted to go fishing, and there was no one to go fishing with, or no one to teach him how to fish. He was about 10, 11 years old, and he got up in the morning, he went and he sat at the river, and he had taken a pin and bent the pin and attached it to a piece of string, no bait. We had a bit of bread on it, and he sat there fishing for several hours. And I remember the sadness I felt when I heard the story, because here was this young boy just crying out for someone to teach him how to fish, and there was no one. In the absence, he still went and fished, but there was such a sadness around the whole, I need someone, I want someone. And as young men growing up, we cry out, don't we? We cry out for older men to mentor us, to show us how to do life.
In my own case, being away from my sons in particular, and in prison, having made very poor choices early on in my life, and being a young father, there were men in my community who took my sons, and particularly my oldest son, and said to him, "We're not going to allow your father's incarceration to be an excuse for your failure." That, for me, was the epitome of mentorship. That a young boy who, in the absence of his father, was told first by his grandfather and then by the men in the community that as bad as he may have felt about my absence,
we're going to step in.
We're going to step in.
Lovely.
And it's that stepping in, it's that void that's filled by men who are loving and kind and who use their power for good,
Right,
that transformed his life. So now I think about my oldest son, and Adrian, and he says to me, "Dad, the worst thing that could happen to me is not to be there for my own children." And so he's become the mentor. He's become the person who in his life exemplifies what he ought to be, what he needs to be for other young men who don't have a father there like he had.
There's a wonderful story from the South African Game Reserve, the Kruger National Park. In the early 1990s, the population of elephants was getting too large in the park. So they had to either cull some of them or remove some of them because they became dangerous to the surrounding. So they decided to relocate some elephants from the Kruger National Park to a brand new park called the Pilanesberg. And because of logistics, they took the smaller elephants as opposed to the big bull elephants. They relocated a whole bunch of elephants. 2 years later, these young elephants started growing up into full maturity, but they started behaving terribly. They started charging tourists. They started trying to mate with rhinoceroses. They killed 37 rhinos, true story. And conservationists were very confused. They'd never seen this happen in nature before, until they realized that these young bull elephants had grown up without an older bull elephant. They went back to the Kruger Park. They got 2 bull elephants. They brought them into the park, and within 2 weeks, the behavior of these young elephants was absolutely in line. And that's what we're seeing in society, isn't it? We're seeing a lack of bull elephants teaching the younger men how to use their testosterone, how to use their strength, how to do life as a man.
This conversation about how men ought to mentor, need to mentor other men, young boys into manhood. You so often hear the stories of boys who are, in their own sense, powerful. They imagine they're men. And I think to myself, having gone to prison at 17 years old, I thought I was a man until I came into the company of actual men. Men who had a sense of what manhood meant. And to be mentored by those who had a greater sense, a greater depth of understanding.
Right.
It was, in fact, when I say mentorship, I'm actually talking about how do we learn how to be men? What does it look like? What does it feel like? How do we begin to have a conversation with other men, particularly as boys, as young men, about our own power and about our own efficacy? This question of mentorship is way beyond the ideal of I want someone to show me how to be successful. I want someone to take me into a job. You can get the job, and guess what? You can even be successful and still not know how to be a man. So mentorship, in the context that we're talking about in Man to Man Talks, is about how to learn to be men.